I don't know if the camera can zoom in that close, but Chris Cunningham just gave me this sticker. And hopefully, somewhere out there in America, there's a guy running for president who will see this sticker and think twice about talking about those of us who cling to God and guns. Thank you for the kind introduction. It's great to be back in Louisville. I must tell you, the option for me was Fallujah. We are, as you know, I hope, on the eve of Armed Forces Day. That is tomorrow, when we celebrate those who are serving our country in uniform. I am frequently asked by my colleagues, that's what we call each other in the so-called media, if I've learned anything about journalism. Actually, the way they normally put it is to say, have you learned anything yet? I tell you, yeah, I've learned that both the media and the military take casualties. In the media, it's usually when they fall off their egos and land on their IQs, but it's about the same. Now that I'm on a nationwide book tour for the book American Heroes, I'm doing a lot of interviews with the media, getting to meet all kinds of colleagues. The cover of this book is a United States Army Staff Sergeant by the name of John Duggins. And I was doing an interview with a young lady on the West Coast from Sacramento, and she said to me, I find the cover of that book to be offensive. I find it to be intimidating. I said, lady, when you're laying face down in the street and some radical Islamic terrorist is trying to kill you, that's exactly what you want to see coming up behind you. And then she said, well, how do you define a hero? I said, it's very simple. A hero is not someone who wears a spandex suit or a cape. A hero is not a person who catches a pass in the end zone or climbs a mountain single-handedly or sets a new athletic record. A hero is a person who puts themselves at risk for the benefit of another. And that's what all of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, guardsmen, and Marines are doing right now. I have to share this with you because what we're gathered here for on this eve of Armed Forces Day is very important. And my remarks are not nearly as important as the person who's going to join us here later on this platform, the only graduate of my alma mater running for president this year. And he will be here shortly. But I wanted to just share with you some of the thoughts about why I consider this election to be so important. And some of it is the consequence of what we call feedback. I can be in Iraq on a rooftop or standing next to a M1 tank or a Bradley fighting vehicle or an LAV and be instantly on air all across America. Little tiny satellite dishes that are not much bigger than my laptop. We get instant feedback from any broadcast we're on. I was on Hannity and Colmes one night, the show that I'm most frequently on when I'm overseas. And I had just said something to the effect to Alan Colmes, who's a nice young man that just doesn't get it. I just said to Alan Colmes, I said, you don't understand, Alan, ground combat is the worst experience any human can have. And instantly, a second or two later, pops up on the screen an email from one of our fans. That's how you know the feedback that, one, people actually are listening. Actually, they're watching. And here's what he said. Colonel North, a moment ago on Hannity and Colmes, you said ground combat is the worst experience any human can have. This is not true. The worst experience any human can have is spending time with my mother-in-law. My best friend spent 2 years in Iraq, did a tour of duty in Afghanistan. He lost his right hand in Fallujah. He's met my mother-in-law. I just called him. He agrees, says it's not even a close call. Jim in San Diego. That's feedback. One other quick feedback story. Just before Christmas, I'm on a rooftop in Iraq. The picture of the young soldier I'm standing next to is in the book. We've done a wonderful little vignette. The battle footage taken that day is from my camera, but here's the eyewitness participant. These remarkable Americans that I've spent so much time with over these years. And I realize I'm about to go home for Christmas and he's not. And I say to him, Sergeant, is there anybody at home you want to say hi to? And look right in that camera. And he looks at the little red light on top of the camera and he says, I want to say Merry Christmas to my wife Jane, my son Tommy, and my daughter Sue. I'm sorry I'm going to miss Christmas with you. Please keep me in your prayers. Merry Christmas. We go dark on the satellite, and instantly my satellite telephone that's on the side of my flak jacket rings. I look at the number, it's home. Betsy's just seen the broadcast. It's 4 a.m. in the morning out there. It's 9 p.m. on the East Coast. I punch the button and I say, hey, honey, how did I do? And she says, don't hey, honey, me. Did I just hear you say you're not going to be home for Christmas? Now, we've been married for 40 years. She's given up 15 Christmases with this guy. She said, when you left here in November, mister, you promised me you'd be home for Christmas. So I tell you what, if you don't make it home for Christmas, you might as well stay in Iraq because you'll be a lot safer there than this kitchen. That's called feedback. Let me give you some other feedback. One of the things that grieves me deeply about the way this war has been presented, and I'm not talking just about Iraq, this is a much bigger campaign. A war that was unprovoked by us, declared against us by radical Islam, and it's now being waged not just in Iraq or Afghanistan or Djibouti, but in the Philippines and globally, by people who are dying to kill us. Thus far, 1.3 million young Americans have served in this war. Some in the campaigns in Afghanistan, some in the campaigns in Iraq. And they have been misrepresented by America's media and by America's politicians like few others in my lifetime, and I include those who served with me in a war called Vietnam. These young Americans, have been described in terms that are absolutely odious by many in the press and politics. They've beaten Abu Ghraib like a rented mule for the better part of 4.5 years. Newsweek published a false story about a Quran being flushed down a toilet in Guantanamo, and I was there in Najaf and watched the horror of what happened after the imams read that at Friday prayers. We've had a United States senator liken those who serve in our armed forces to those who'd served under Stalin, Hitler, and Pol Pot. This past week, we had a noted novelist whose books have sold better than mine. Stephen King described them as nothing but uneducated young Americans. And then there's, of course, Pulitzer Prize recipient Chris Hedges of the New York Crimes, or is it the Washington Compost? Chris Hedges describes them as nothing but, quote, poor kids from Mississippi, Texas, and Alabama who couldn't get a decent job or health insurance, so they joined the military because that's all we offered them. I have a message for all of them, the politicians and the press. They are dead wrong about the young Americans serving in our armed forces. I give you a word picture.